necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250.
Hi, welcome to the Cashman Mind, Body, Spirit Show. I think you're going to enjoy this show quite a bit because I'm going to review really the history of why sugar is corrupting this world, and it's my opinion that it's still doing that today. The diseases that we're treating at our hospitals that we're operating on, that we're with high blood pressure and kidney disease and heart disease and dementia and amputations, dislocations, all these diseases are related to sugar consumption. And when all this really start, sugar was produced all over the world and involved slavery. I'm going to review all that with you. So let's start out. First of all, nature, God, whatever, designed us so that we would seek sugar so we get some energy and stay alive. But thousands of years ago, a few hundred years ago, we could only consume a little bit of sugar because we had to go because sugar was produced by plants, and they were mainly seasonal plants. So they were in season for a short period of time, and we would eat them, and the rest of the year we would not eat sugar. Maybe we would even try to gain some weight so that we would have some stored energy in us called fat. You know, animals do that all the time. They will store fat, and then they go into a cave, like my woodchuck lives under my house, and I saw his kids this morning. He's like this before he goes in his little cave under my house. He's been there 22 years, all right? I love plants, I love nature, I love human beings. That's just me, okay? But we humans are eating too much of it. You realize we have within us, in our blood system, only about a teaspoonful of sugar. That's all we have. But we're eating a huge amount of it and storing it as fat and developing 30, 40 diseases that kill us many years before our time. The author of this book, How Sugar Corrupted the World, I'm going to refer to quite a bit, James Walben. He reviews, first of all, it a little in the beginning here, the author's neighborhood, for example, we're referring now to the 40s and 50s, was full of sweet shops. Go across the street and you could have a soda fountain, have a sugary soda, and buy candies, packaged many different ways. And down the street there was another shop. We're talking about the 1940s and 50s. But then the war occurred, Second World War, and they started rationing sugar. You could only buy a certain amount. But by that time, because this way of overeating sugar started in the 30s and 40s, and we had a sweet tooth by then. We wanted it. Why? Because sugar makes you feel good. Yes, it affects part of the brain that secretes dopamine. That's the quick fix. We drink a sugary drink with a lot of sugar, and within seconds this guy lights up and we feel good. And it's like a drink of alcohol, which does the same thing. Some people think, and I debated it once on this very show with somebody, which is more addictive, sugar or cocaine. I think the lady won the debate. She said it was sugar. Yeah, it lights up the nucleus accumbens that secretes serotonin like that, and then it gets dopamine like that, and then it connects to serotonin, which makes you feel good all day. So they're all interconnected in the brain, the hypothalamus, the nucleus accumbens, and it even is connected to your gut. Your taste buds start in your tongue, but they're not just in your tongue. They go all the way down the esophagus to your stomach and your bowel. So the feel-good centers that trigger your addiction to sugar is throughout your body, and it's very important to know that, okay? So many people develop a sweet tooth, and what we didn't know years ago, we now really know, but you don't see dentists talking about it very much because the sugar in our mouth attracts bacteria, which have easy access, and the bacteria love the sugar, and that makes the area acidic, and that eliminates the enamel on your teeth and causes tooth decay. And that has actually been known hundreds of years, at least has occurred. It didn't occur much before the 1,000 years ago, for example, but we have found out by looking at cadavers from cities of people that died 1,200, 1,500 years ago, and we see them as skeletons, but their teeth look fine. There wasn't much sugar available. Queen Elizabeth, for example, around 1500, 1495 or so, ate sugar like anything, because in those years it was not available. But the kings and queens got a hold of it because it was very expensive. But if you look at some of their pictures, you'll notice they got missing teeth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have missing teeth, and it was the sugar that was causing a decay. It was really not well known in those years, but slowly the science has developed. Incidentally, Britain has dental records in the population going back, you won't believe this, 2,000 years. So we know a lot about dental disease, and we should hear a lot more about it. Say, preventative dentistry should be on TV. You don't really hear much about it. And we should, because don't forget to take care of the teeth of your newborn as soon as the teeth develop. Make sure that you're following proper mouth care for your little baby, and as the children go up, teach them to brush their teeth. For example, my parents never told me that, and I remember a fraternity brother coming up to me, yes, at a fraternity at IU, and said, "Rudy, be sure to brush your teeth because we have girls coming over for a party tonight." Can you imagine that I didn't know about how to take care of my teeth before that? I didn't. No one taught me. So I think it's very important to teach this to your children. But only the kings and queens are the ones who could afford sugar hundreds of years ago. But eventually it spread so it was much cheaper. And many became addicted to it. And we had rationing of sugar in the Second World War, and that rationing ended in 1953. And then in England and America, we started adding sugary products to coffee and tea, and that even increased the addiction. Yeah. In France, they added so much sugar to their coffee that if you took a teaspoon, it would stand up when you put it in your coffee cup. Yeah. Can you imagine? But people didn't know the science, and it made them feel so good. Even myself, who has generally good health habits, if someone were to lay a donut in front of me in the morning and it looked real good, I might just grab it, in spite of eating this sort of thing and not addicted to sugar. But that nature, evolution is designed in us to seek that, which makes us feel good. So I don't feel guilty when I'm talking about this period. But in 1942-53, sugar was added to everything. And candy shops, soda shops, every food we ate, we added sugar. We all went to the dentist. Many had missing teeth. I remember me as a child going to the dentist and having some teeth pulled because of trouble, pain. But my parents and even the dentist didn't say you got to brush your tooth every day. If they did, they certainly didn't do it in a manner that I reacted to it. So false teeth became common, and so then in 2016, Coca-Cola decided to do something about it, at least to a point. They started making some drinks without sugar, but they put in sugar substitutes, which also affected your GI tract in your brain, and they became addictive. So if you're looking at no sugar drinks today, be careful, read the labels, what's in there. The thing to drink is water, plain water. That's what I drink, because these other ones have in it resveratrol and other enzymes which can have other health effects and can also be addictive. So in the 1600s, sugar was a luxury. Only the rich could eat it. And what was interesting, and when the rich and the kings and the queens, when they had a party and in their castles, they would have a gathering, they would have statues out of sugar. They would have carriages out of sugar. They would have horses made out of sugar. And it was just to let people know that you had royalty, to let you know that you had a lot of money. It was very expensive. But they would have a party where everything that you were looking at was made out of sugar. Can you imagine that? But in the 17th century, sugar became a bit cheaper. And by the 1800s, even the poor could afford a few sugary products. Not a lot, but today we have staggering volumes compared to those years. Okay, but Brazil actually was a big producer of sugar before we started trading it much more in the Canary Islands off Africa and in the Mediterranean, and eventually slavery got involved. So let's talk about that. And like I said, sugar can be the driver because we have this center, this 1 millimeter in size, the nucleus accumbens, which lights up, secretes dopamine, and I'm in heaven and I feel good. And believe me, I've done it too. And most people today, decades ago, were getting the sugar really from sugary drinks. That was 50% of it. So before you drink something, have a look at the label. You notice the bottle I got here, it's water in case I get dry. So, but you know, sugar is written about even in the Bible. But honey was the main source of it hundreds of years ago. Okay, hundreds of years ago, and it's even in the Bible, and so a land of honey, and it's written up in the Bible also. So it's in history. The Buddhist cuisine was sugary products. So about the 1400s or so, it was cultivated in Egypt, Syria, Mongolia. You know, sugar spread. It started in Asia, and then Egypt, and the Middle East, and then the Mediterranean, but people were consuming a small amount, not a huge amount, in the Mediterranean trade, and they got some of the sugar from sugary plants in Africa, but it wasn't a huge deal. So it was concentrated in Spain, Italy. It came to the port in Venice, for example, but eventually the price kept on going up, but people were so addicted they had to have some that a few islands off the coast of Africa, they enslaved people, like the Madeira Islands off the coast of Africa. They had slavery there, and they were able to deliver and ship the sugar to Europe, to England, to Germany, Italy, Spain. So we're still localized. But eventually, the price gets so high, and people were using so much more of it that the slave trade developed, because the only thing would keep the price reasonable. And they literally, and it was mainly blacks, but it was also some whites. About 12 million African black people were enslaved, and under brutal conditions were shipped to sugar plantations. At first, it was the Canary Islands, for example. It started, in the Mediterranean. They used some slavery too, but then the islands off the coast of Africa, and it was done by the English and also the French. Everyone sort of tried to get involved because there was a lot of money to be made. And around 1635, 1649, that time, sugar was available in most small towns at a reasonable price. And in around 1580, they even put out recipe books. Yes, they even put out recipe books. But all of them, and you can still find them in the library, but every one of them had sugar in it as a main ingredient. So it was really unhealthy. the price of sugar eventually came down, especially when they discovered the fructose in plants and fruit, and then when the Japanese discovered the enzyme that could convert the fructose in corn, make fructose corn syrup. It was extremely sweet, even more addictive than regular sugar, and that dropped the price tremendously, and they could spread throughout the world. And in 1590, Queen Elizabeth I, she really had a sweet tooth. Okay, when she was invited to a party, they had statues, all types, all made out of sugar. They could afford it, but her teeth turned yellow. And eventually they made paintings of her, so they're still available to see. But eventually they became black, and eventually follow-up paintings show she had no teeth. Beautiful, expensive gowns, the most beautiful things you ever saw. But if you looked at her mouth, there were no teeth there. Sugar was on the march, there was an explosion in Greece. Mount Vesuvius blew up, and the whole city, Athens, was buried underneath the ground, and it laid there. This occurred over 1,000 years ago, and about many years later, they dug some of the bodies up, and they saw the skeletons, and they saw the teeth. They found very little dental disease. See, they did not have sugar available in the amounts that we're eating sugar today. So that was part of the scientific discovery that sugar is related to the teeth. There's also a beautiful painting of King Louis XIV. Beautiful outfit, gorgeous, and you might not notice it. You can just probably Google it, the picture show up. He had no teeth. See, he could afford the sugar. And as I already mentioned, Britain had dental data going back 2,000 years. So before the 17th century, age determined dental problems. And there were some, even the people who didn't eat a lot of sugar, they had some dental problems. But you could look at the skeletons in the teeth and pretty much estimate the age. So there's some natural deterioration of teeth, but it's not very much, okay? But after that, availability of sugar determined your dental problems, as they still do today. Remember what I said, brush your teeth. I noticed I still go to the dentist, and then I have a cleaning coming up. But little inflammation here and there stopped completely when I started brushing my teeth using mouthwash twice a day. Interesting. And I floss some. That's just my own experience. Haven't had a pain there for about 1.5 years. Yeah. I double my brushing. Just before I go to bed, I'm brushing my teeth and flossing and using mouthwash. I'm sure there are better dental habits than that I discussed, but I'm just saying I'm doing it every day. And years ago, and they still have them today, obviously, all kind of sweet concoctions, candy stores, everywhere. They're less now. They're still available. Today. And smoking tobacco also affects the teeth. It constricts the blood vessels, and the nicotine affects the teeth. So keep that in mind too. But the French people, 18th century, and they took over some of the islands in the Caribbean, okay, like Jamaica in the 18th century, and they enslaved the people, and all those islands in the Caribbean was filled with about 2 million, okay, Santo Domingo and Jamaica and all those islands, filled with about 2 million natives who, and I've seen pictures and written about them, they were the most beautiful people in the world, gorgeous. Most of them didn't have any clothes on, that was not their habit. Gorgeous people. A century later, after slavery arrived and Europeans arrived, it was the Columbian Revolution after the time of Christopher Columbus. They were all dead. It wasn't just the main problem, really, that they made slaves out of them or killed them. It was that they brought in viruses and bacteria they had no resistance to. They had never been exposed to them, and it wiped them out. 2 million of them gone after about 100 years. Europeans did that. And this second thing the Europeans did, they because the natives wouldn't work for free. They wanted them to produce sugar, cotton, tobacco, but they didn't want to work for free. And they were replaced by slaves from Africa. Remember I said 12 million slaves, maybe 11 million survived, the rest died under brutal conditions because they were stored underneath the ship, and most of them were in chains. But there was a little difference in culture. I mean, the natives, they just wouldn't. It's hard to get them to work as slaves. The Africans maybe did. They also totally destroyed the native forests. You know what they did? They slashed and burned. They burned them all down and turned them into sugar plantations. Then people lived in the hills, but if you were to take a boat around those islands, you'd see nothing but plantations, all organized in set squares and roads, and they made, because that's where the money was. And at first, it was 200 acres or so, but they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And after a while, most of these plantation owners owned 10, 20,000 acres. Very rich people. They built huge castles. Many of them didn't even live there. They lived in England because they could not get used to the weather. It was warmer there, and they were exposed to the mosquitoes and viral diseases themselves, and many did not survive that. And and as I mentioned, then he started adding sugar to tea. That was the English way. The French, it was many coffee. Americans, it was more coffee. They increased the need for sugary products. And Brazil really was where the biggest producer of sugar before the time of the islands of the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Remember I said first it started in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, and then switched to the Caribbean eventually, but before that, Brazil was the main producer of coffee. But they also used slavery. They also grew a lot of coffee. Even the children of the slaves had to work. And sugar cane was really the main. They would cut it, and then they would process it. They could process it locally by boiling it and eventually turning it into crystals. But there were parts of the plant, though, that were left over, like the stem of the plant, and that eventually could be turned into molasses and rum. And of course, and the rum was mainly consumed by the natives. In Brazil, the rum got so popular, they had bars all over the place, and people developed drunkenness. It wasn't just about the slaves, it was the regular people too. So the rum was made from the leftover and molasses leftovers of the sugary stem. So there were processing plants, like in Jamaica, maybe 50 to 100 of them, and they multiplied, and a lot of it went to Amsterdam and Europe, and they distributed to the other countries, to Germany, for example. This was before the time that the sugar beets were discovered. And because of war and conflict and Napoleon having to feed his troops, they found out that they could process the beet and produce a sugary product, which got to be huge. It got to be huge. Beets were grown all over the world, even the United States. And the Germans and Napoleon was so enamored with the whole thing, because the troops had to be fed something, sugary products. As Napoleon said, the troops march best based on how their stomach feels. Okay, that once he found out the process of it, that he built factories around outside Paris that were big producers of sugar, and he fed his army with it. It was all over the world. The U.S. grew a lot of it, eventually, the people on the island of Haiti, Santo Domingo, the natives were just tired of being enslaved, not getting paid, having to do all this work, and they took on Napoleon's army, and they managed to kick them off the island. Mm-hmm. They did. Would you believe that? And the leader of that was eventually, though, caught by the French, and he was imprisoned, and he died in France. But Haiti, Santo Domingo, get to be politically a very complex thing, as he had written about even in New York Times recently, reviewing the U.S. get involved with the politics of Haiti and the sugar, and very complex. Politics is involved extensively with it even today. They made the island people, because they took over the huge plantations, and they agreed, you wouldn't believe this, they agreed to repay the plantation owners for taking their plantations away. It doesn't make any sense, but they did. This is what politics does, and the U.S. eventually got involved with the thing today, and the politics is still there today. Believe me, our government is supporting the price of sugar and fructose corn syrup today. Politics are still involved in it. Our hospitals are filled full of people whose diet is dominated by sugar, and they've developed dementia and thyroid disease and gum disease and heart disease and lung disease, kidney disease, amputations, dislocations, heart attacks, and stroke, all are the product of eating too much sugar. The politics has not stopped. It's still there today. And and religion get involved too. And in South America, like El Salvador, for example, the priest controlled the population because they moved the natives off the land to clear it to make tobacco and sugar plantations. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something interesting too, because a lot of that, because nicotine and smoking is also a crop. You will not believe this one, but I can show you the books, and I know the subject. Cigarettes have sugar in them. In 1920, yes, 1920, they found out they could only addict maybe 15% of the people to nicotine. 20% of the people account for 90% of the sales of cigarettes. You know what they found out? If they added some sugar to the cigarette, the addiction rate would go up. I hardly speak to anybody that knows that. But read Gary Taub's book. He's devoted a whole chapter to it. It's in other books. I knew it already, so I was glad that he was writing about it. You've all heard of him. And what they do with tobacco, after they dry it, they hang it upside down and they dry it for about a week or so. And you know what they do then? They dip it in molasses to increase the sugar content of the leaf, and then they make cigarettes out of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you hear about the e-cigarettes and stuff, that's got sugar in it. Look it up. I know this subject. Isn't it interesting? About 2.8 million Africans moved to Brazil, and they were slaves there. The indigenous natives were moved out because they wouldn't do the work, and the slaves replaced them. And a lot of the trade in sugar occurred in Antwerp and Amsterdam, and a lot of that sugar came from Brazil, and then it was moved over to Germany. 1550, a lot of people were smoking too in Antwerp, so it was a mixing of nicotine products. Until 1630, Brazil really had no competitors to the sugar trade. Mm-hmm. Then competition started. So how do you compete? Change the price. And that's when sugar met slavery. If you get people working for you for nothing, the price of sugar drops. And you can sell easier across the world. That's exactly what happened. And the Spaniards controlled it for a time because Columbus started it in Caribbean. He brought over wheat products, sugar products. Wheat failed. We didn't work out. But the French were late in the game, and they and this for a time was an imperial game. The kings and queens are the ones who regulated the land and the ships. It was Columbus's second trip that he brought over all kinds of plants and sugary plants and changed the topography of the islands. Remember, the natives, 2 million, were wiped out because of viruses and bacteria, and they didn't want to work as slaves, okay? And around 1700, about 60,000 tons of sugar was imported from the Caribbean. 10 different companies were doing it. 1750 was up to 150,000 tons. 90% of the sugar that was sold in the world came from the Caribbean. And what they needed was large plantations. Remember I said they started with small ones. They were bigger. And remember, the natives and the local Indians, they resisted slavery. And they had no borders to the land. They didn't establish borders to any land. They all owned it together. It was only after Europeans came that they divided it up in parcels. And the natives themselves didn't feel they owned the land. Okay. And maybe that's why they didn't object as readily. And I would say, what would Martin Luther do? Okay, and you want to pay them back for all that's occurred? How upsetting it is. I know what Martin Luther King would do. He wouldn't kill them. He wouldn't shoot bullets. He wouldn't bring out tanks. What he would say, don't eat the sugar. That's my point. Eat less sugar. That will have a tremendous impact on the industry because our food is processed now. They took off the coverings, the germ and the brand, so that you eat the endosperm, the sugar. And remember, the sugar goes to your brain and addicts you pretty quickly. You can get addicted to sugar pretty quickly. I still think that'd be a great approach. Don't eat the sugar. It was not till the 1850s or so that morality started to play a part in slavery. That in England especially, there were about 10 people there that met regularly that brought up the moral point of view of slavery. You know, it's interesting, the recent shootings that we have seen with the 19 children that died the other day, and we're speaking about guns. I mean, big guns were used. And what TV I was watching, how do you change the culture? Okay. And a minister called in, and he started talking about the morality of it. Sound familiar? That's what they did with slavery, the morality. The morality of killing the children. What's in common? I mean, the guns are in common. Hard to change the children. You can work at it, but what's in common is instruments of destruction. So to morally look at it from a moral standpoint, not a constitutional standpoint, kind of interesting. I just bring it up because it's similar to what they used at that time, and slavery was eventually stopped. The English stopped shipping them, I think, in the 1830s, and then we had the Civil War, and we managed to stop slavery. But I wrote a book called Eating Sugar, The New Slavery. And I was thinking about it today, but is it really new? We've been eating it for a long time, but when you think of a specific people who were enslaved to work in the fields to produce sugar, get out of slavery, but then again, and it's not just black people, it's white people too, were enslaved by sugar. Fortunately, I feel free of it. I don't have to eat that donut. I can drive by, but other people are so addicted, they just got to eat sugar every day, so it can't be an addiction. And in some people, it has to be addressed like that. And to be open-minded, okay? And of course, I mentioned that the clearing of the land in the Caribbean and wherever they're planting sugar, it has tremendous environmental impact in Brazil, and the Caribbean Islands, and everywhere. We grow it now in the U.S. Sugar is grown all over the world. Has great environmental impact. We have to slash and burn and cut down trees and bushes, and less oxygen is sent up to the sky, and we have global warming now. So the natural world is being erased by this excessive sugar consumption. And the natives, I already mentioned, were erased from the face of the world. 2 million people, beautiful people, friendly people, nice people who treated the incoming Europeans very well. And the original natives were called the Taino people, T-A-I-N-O, Taino people, and they came from South America, and they settled these islands. They had no effect on the local ecologies. What they did was consistent with what was already there. They didn't slash and burn, did anything unusual to people. They didn't take property lines. They shared the property, and Hispaniola was. Which I think was Haiti, Dominican Republic, I guess was Haiti, had about 1 million people. Jamaica had about 60,000 people. Cuba about 150,000 people. So about 2 million lived in the Caribbean. And but when Columbus came, it was really the Columbian cataclysm. He was the beginning of the destruction of it, and he was used to a government that was run by the kings and queens, the monarchs. So it was called the Columbian cataclysm, monarchical government, kings and queens. The natives were naked versus Europeans arrived with lances and weapons and horses, and they had no chance against the Europeans coming in. And so you could drive them off the land, and besides, the Europeans brought with them viruses and bacteria, which destroyed them with illnesses. I mean, they totally wiped them out. And they were replaced then by Africans, slaves. Also grown there was tobacco and cotton. And sugar. By 1650 in Barbados, most plants had been destroyed by sugar plantations. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. End of the 17th century, sugar was king. They had to import coal to process it. Remember, you burn it, you heat it, eventually turn it into crystals, but that's a lot of work. And the byproducts were used to make molasses and rum. And by 1780, 200,000 slaves had landed in the Barbados. 1670, the French burned out the English in St. Kitts. It went up in smoke, and they took over the island. But then these sugar plantations were established from the U.S. Chesapeake Bay to Charlottesville, Carolina, to Brazil. All along the coast were sugar plantations with slave labor by a small group of white men. When slavery finally was ended, remember we had the Civil War, England stopped shipping slaves around the 1830s. Growing sugar didn't stop. It slowed down for about 10 years, but then they brought in indentured servants from India and China. Indentured meaning they owed something to somebody, and instead of paying you back money, they might owe you 5 years of work, maybe 10 years of work. This was a system which was close to as bad as slavery. These people were mistreated, but a lot of them were brought all over the world, especially to these islands, especially China, India provided a lot of them. And they were growing tobacco and cotton and sugar. And eventually, that was also occurring in the United States, in the South, in Louisiana, for example. And sugar by that time was invading drugstores, food processing. Every food you had some sugar in it, and we were all feeling great eating this. But what wasn't mentioned, and partly wasn't known, is it was creating a tremendous amount of illness. And people that used to look pretty healthy, and you can even look around today, sit somewhere and watch the people walk by. A lot of them have gained weight. And who's responsible for that? Well, the people that are eating that, because of the tremendous stresses that they have. They eat that, but the government, processed food companies, industry, they're all in cahoots together, and they're getting away with making you sick. The best they've done is that you can read a label which you don't understand, and we're not eating fresh food anymore that have not been processed. You won't believe this, but they even changed the genetic code of the food you're eating. Your body's not used to that. Yeah, the Rockefeller Institute, many years ago, they have one of their divisions over in Mexico, and they put some scientists in there who genetically modified corn and wheat. It used to have 3 or 4 genes. Now it's got 10 or 20. The plant used to be this tall, and it would lean over, and production was low because it was leaning over. They managed to genetically figure out to make wheat into a very short plant, and lo and behold, it had a lot of product on it, and they could increase sales, and it spread it throughout the world. The only thing is they didn't realize that, or maybe they did, is that the genetic code has been changed and was affecting the human body. So these people that were starving across the world, we were saving lives, but we're killing them with chronic disease because the genetic code of the food has changed. Very interesting to read about that. I even saw an interview of the scientists that discovered that increased the food consumptions throughout the world. The story is told in Minnesota at a conference I was at the university, and I was walking through, and there's this tablet, and the whole story is there, but I already knew it. I already knew it. And but again, you know, you have to be informed. And Asia got involved with this a little bit too, and we started adding sugar to tea and coffee, and that spread the amount needed by a lot. And then the Chinese discovered porcelain, and to put sugar in porcelain, it sure made it look good, and we started getting enamored with porcelain sugar bowls. Yeah, and they were brought over here, and the porcelain was brought here, and sugar was sent to back to Asia and Japan, and but sugar and porcelain was a perfect match for tea and coffee, and as I already mentioned, the French would put so much sugar in their coffee, the teaspoonful would stand up because they became sugar addicts. And chocolate came around too, and it was sweet. So tea, coffee, sugar, they all addicted us. And a lot of that in the 1700s, huge amounts of tea were imported from China. And the English went more for the tea, we went more for the coffee. Remember, we had a conflict, and part of the conflict between the United States and Britain that occurred is because the kings and queens want to make some more money, and we were importing the sugar, and they knew we're addicted to it. And coffee, they start putting big taxes on it. And in the U.S. had certainly sugar addicts too, and friction occurred, and eventually resulted in the war. And so what they found out is that if you increase the tax on sugar, this is interesting, that people will use less of it. And that may be the answer for us in the end, increase, like in Mexico, increase the tax on sugar. It's called the elasticity of demand. And there are locals who probably are running a sugar addiction rate higher than even us. And of course, the diabetes rate is going like this. It's interesting that we could take advantage of it. So in summary, what I'm saying is how much sugar are you consuming? It causes 30, 40, 50 diseases. You'll die 20 years before your time. You'll be disabled the previous 20 years if you're eating a lot of sugar because you're going to get diabetes. And there's 30 to 40 diseases which can be prevented, stopped, and if you get the disease, now get reversed. Get a blood sugar and a serum insulin. Most doctors don't order that. It's a mistake. Serum insulin is elevated 10 to 20 years before the blood sugar goes up, and you can avoid getting that disease, which is a killer in this nation. Those hospitals all over the world, China, India, have a high rate now of diseases related to sugar, type 2 diabetes, and its diseases. China has the most because it has the most people. So anyway, thanks for listening. You can go to diabetessupportfw.com to get a lot more information. And I do think sugar is corrupting the world, and it is still doing that. It's part of my passion to teach you to stay healthy, look good. Remember, I'm 39 for the 46th time and play 2 hours of pickleball today. I love you. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.